Welcome to the Saturday Six. I'm Rob Bowrron, the econometrician, economechicken behind Beta Rank and Sharp College Football. Today we're going to talk about 6 games that, they don't always matter in a sense. A lot of the games that end up mattering in college football are not particularly close. So these games actually would be games, though, that you might flip to because they should be interesting and or close. Likely closer than, a lot of the blowouts that we have on the docket this week. A lot of the games with big teams this week have already been canceled, as we got with a late cancellation last night with Iowa State and Illinois. Or they're just, as I said, like they're just like Alabama versus Auburn just shouldn't be, unless Alabama turns the ball over a couple of times, just really shouldn't be a close game at all. Both Vegas and Beta Rank have Alabama as significant favorites in that game. So the games we'll cover today are games that are all projected to be within a touchdown. Some of them won't be. Some of them will have the favorite or even the underdog will end up with enough turnovers on their side of the ball to end up, winning pretty handily. But most of these games should be pretty close when we look at them. And some of them have some really interesting storylines to go with them. But as always, there are quite a few games that we, lost this week due to cancellation or postponement. And really too, I mean, we've picked up 2 games of the, the Pac-12 has really become specialists at this, you could argue. Although the first one that they did with this with Cal and UCLA was an unmitigated disaster for Cal. It wasn't really all that much fun to watch. But we have 2 pretty hastily scheduled games this week, with Washington and Utah picking up a game after both of their opponents ended up being unable to play. Washington State and Arizona State. Arizona State's lost 3 games in 3 straight weeks, which means that they likely had a secondary set of positives that have hit the team and have again affected the team through contact tracing, because to be at a point where you have 2 weeks has been about the norm, for college football teams. Being at 3 weeks is tougher. Either that or they got their positives like right on the Friday or right on the Saturday, and that got the game that day, the game the next week, and the game after that they were going to be unlikely to be able to get out and play. So really weird season for the Sun Devils. They played 1 game so far, and now we'll have 3 weeks without having played one. So Utah, ends up making the trip up to Seattle for interesting reasons too. I mean, the Huskies didn't make the trip to Utah because they couldn't get TV networks to a network truck to Salt Lake in time, and there were network trucks that they could get rolling and get to Seattle in time for the game. So the Utes are off to play in Seattle tonight. We had yet another cancellation, though. This time USC ended up with some positives and was unable to play. So USC will have played 3 games in 3 weeks, and in each of those games, their opponent was playing the first game that they had played all season, and now USC is out and will not be able to play, and may not be able to play next week. They miss Colorado, who is at 2-0 and has to feel pretty good about themselves. Certainly, USC was likely going to be their toughest test to date. Colorado gets a late schedule in with San Diego State, who was willing to be, unlike BYU with Washington, was willing to be the backup game to not have a guaranteed game on the schedule. They had an open date and they were willing to show up and play if Colorado ended up open or not. BYU, of course, chose not to play, which I actually think is, I don't know, it depends on what you're playing for. I think it ends up hurting them in the long run anyway. I think Washington would have been a favorite over BYU. And I would have actually had to do some model adjustments to be able to handle the non-conference there, because as it is now, of course, with most teams in the SEC, in the Big Ten, and the Pac-12, the Pac-12 will have its first non-conference game this week. It's nearly impossible to have cross-conference comparisons. And as we've talked about and I'll reiterate again because I think it's worth reiterating. Beta rank right now in a normal season, it sits where, the distribution for conferences, right? Like we're able to do sort of like try to figure out how good the SEC is versus other teams, and then how good within, the teams within the SEC are versus each other. And you get a very good idea of how teams within conferences are against each other because you have so many data points connecting them. However, so what you would end up with is like the SEC would end up with a distribution like up here, and then you would have like, say, like the American, that might be somewhere like here, right? And like the best teams in the American are grading out kind of in the range of like, middle teams in the SEC, and then on down. Right now, because we just don't have any data point comparisons, like, the distributions are sort of looking like this. The priors are doing a little bit of work, but just really not enough at this point. However, I don't want to reintroduce more prior because our priors are from the preseason, and the preseason, some of these teams were just way off on. And so as long as teams are mostly playing, conference games, it makes sense for beta rank to continue to run, off of, models that are mostly built for conference play. When we get to bowl season, and I've talked about this, I'll make some pretty hard adjustments to put in a lot more prior to try to reintroduce some of that, what might be the more distribution you more expect. Anyway, so let's just get into it. I'm excited about some of the games we have this week. There's going to be some fun ones. Starting off, of course, the Egg Bowl. You can get more exciting than the Egg Bowl, but Mike Leach, Lane Kiffin. It's practically a press conference bowl. But Ole Miss comes in at number 58. Mississippi State's at number 80. Again, we've talked about these would likely be higher with a normal season with non-conference play. But this is really an offense-driven team for Ole Miss. Number 12 on offense. Jeff Lebby's their OC. They've done a really good job, and I feel like Matt Corral's also done a really good job for them. They're an explosive offense primarily, a little bit more than they're an efficient offense, but their drive efficiency isn't bad. It's sort of middle of the road for the Power Five. Their play efficiency is pretty good. They do avoid 3 and outs. Their negative drive number is not bad. They're better throwing the ball than they are running the ball. This is a flip from where they were last year with that Rich Rodriguez offense. I'm pretty, I was a little worried with how they would pull off the switch from the Rich Rod offense over. It was helpful that Corral decided not to transfer. I think they've done a really good job. And really, I've been impressed with where Ole Miss has been offensively coming into this year. Mississippi State, this is the first year under defensive coordinator Zach Arnett. I'm really impressed with this Bulldogs defense bouncing back. They were excellent in Joe Moorhead's first year. The best defense in college football that year. They lost a lot. They really fell off the next year. Moorhead never quite got the offense going where he wanted it in Starkville, and so he was gone. The hire that Leach made here, Zach Arnett, who is a Rocky Long disciple, I think has really worked out so far. So their drive efficiency numbers were a bit more where they make their hay. They have struggled a little bit at containing explosive drives. So look for them if they are able to force Ole Miss to drive the length of the field. That's going to play well for them. They're decent at negative drives, not a big run pass split. Like this 3-3-5. They do have the extra DB on the field, but they are able to handle. But the way that it is structured and the way they're handling, they are structured around the line of scrimmage. It is able to handle the run pretty well. This is similar to what Clemson went to with adding a DB onto the field against Ohio State to contain Ohio State's run game in that playoff semifinal. On the other side of the ball, this is where the struggles really come in. I don't think either of these units are truly this bad. Both of these units are suffering from that distribution problem that we talked about, right? Like if we had non-conference in here, these might simply be in the 60s or something along those lines, just very bad Power 5 units. However, this is still very bad units for the SEC, or for a Power 5 program. The offense for Mississippi State really has not got it going. Leach has profoundly struggled. It's a little bit more than simply you just drop 8 and play zone. Leach he has struggled with his play calling, which is a bit too predictable. And I do think that teams, in the SEC certainly have the athleticism, and the defensive coordinators around the SEC, some of the highest paid in college football. You expect them to be some of the best in the business. They have shown that they're able to really, with the exception of Bo Pelini, go out and execute against this Leach offense pretty well. And the game plan, hasn't changed a ton to go and do that. Leach has not been able to adapt, which does not speak well to his plasticity of mind, if you will. The Ole Miss defense has really struggled. DJ Durkin was a weird hire. He's an awful person who should not be a football coach after what happened at Maryland. But on top of it, he's not a very good defensive coordinator. So it was a really weird hire for Lane Kiffin to make, frankly. They've profoundly struggled. They're at 125 on defense. Their drive efficiency is really their best metric, but it's not great, and they do give up a lot of big plays. They might find Durkin might find a way to struggle in this game, which really should, if there's a straw that breaks the camel, Durkin should be fired after this performance and all of the baggage he brings to the table. They're sitting at 120 on an effective pass. It could be a struggle for them against this Mississippi State offense. We'll see. I'm interested to see this side of the ball in particular, because this might make it closer than you might expect. Anyway, Ole Miss has a 78% win probability here. They better not finish -1 on turnovers, because it'll be close enough that if they do that, Mississippi State could pull off the upset. Two, good but not great Big 12. Kind of middle of the road Big 12 teams, maybe towards the bottom actually of the Big 12 this year. Actually, let's be honest. What's been an interesting year? It's the offense for Kansas State. They were a defense first team last year under Chris Kleeman. This is Dave Aranda's first year at Baylor. Kleeman he's done a good job, but Kansas State has definitely had their struggles. Their offense here in particular is really struggling. And in some ways, I find this interesting because it is similar to Craig Bohl's struggles at Wyoming. The North Dakota State offense has not translated well, into the FBS as well as it does in the FCS. They've really struggled to put it together in year 1 and year 2 offensively. They've actually regressed a little bit in year 2 on the offensive side of the ball. They're not great at running the ball, which is really what they want to be their calling card. A little bit better throwing the ball, but their best number here is their explosive drives. Courtney Messingham is your OC here. For Baylor, it's Ron Roberts is your DC. Unsurprisingly, Aranda and Roberts have done a pretty good job with this Baylor defense, despite all of the loss. They had a ton of production losses, coming into the season. They struggle with drive efficiency. Teams can put together long drives against this Baylor defense, but they offset that by being able to contain big plays, forcing some 3 and outs. They're a lot better against the pass right now than they are against the run. This might play a little bit into Kansas State's favor. It's tough. There's a big disparity here. These units are on very different sides of the spectrum. You flip it around though, and again, now we all of a sudden have a pretty decent Kansas State defense against a really struggling Baylor offense. Larry Fedora is your OC for the Bears here. His first season there. They really have not put it together in almost any part of what Beta rank measures. They're struggling to put together long drives. They don't put together big plays. Their negative drives. They have fewer 3 and outs than you might expect here. Better throwing the ball than they are running the ball, but they're really struggling. They've had some opt-outs, at the running back position, but most of the time, running back, struggling to run the ball comes back to your offensive line. And you flip it around, and with Kansas State here, they've done pretty well. They promoted Joe Klanderman to DC after losing Scotty Hazelton. After 1 year, he went off to Michigan State to be their DC. They've hung around a little bit. I think that this unit has done pretty well there, and this again mirrors what we've seen at Wyoming, where Bohl has been able to put together an effective, one of the best defenses really in the group of 5, but has really struggled offensively. In the North Dakota State clones, they're even run pass split. They don't force as many 3 and outs as you'd like. They do not. Another number that they really struggle with is that they struggle with drive efficiency. You can put together longer drives here, and their explosive drives number, is really, where they make their, mild amount of hay, I guess you could say, is like they contain big plays. Baylor's got a 55% win probability here. Just a real tight game expected, you know, like unless there are some turnovers, this game should be pretty close. May not be very high scoring, and may not display the most offensive competency that you want to see, but should be a real close game if you want to tune in and see it. There were not a lot of close games this week. So we get income Arizona at 78 and UCLA at 55. Two teams that are coming off very different performances against, you know, two teams that were thought to be at the, you know, near the top of the Pac-12 pecking order. So Kevin Sumlin's at Arizona, Chip Kelly's at UCLA. Kelly's your offensive play caller for the UCLA offense. They look like they're starting to really put it together. You know, coming off of a performance against Oregon. Oregon had an excellent defense last year. They were projected to have an excellent defense with everything they had coming back again this year. They don't. UCLA, I mean, as we just saw last night with Oregon getting upset by Oregon State, Stanford was able to run the ball. I mean, if you can run the ball, and UCLA ran the ball well against Oregon, if you can run the ball at all, you're going to be able to run the ball against the Ducks. Their run defense has been nothing short of awful. And so some of these numbers is we are still catching up to in the Pac-12, of course, is like some of these teams, this will only be their third game, you know, playing. If you're Utah, this will only be your second game. So, you know, we don't have as, you know, enough data yet to know a lot of things firmly. What we do know is that, you know, this offense for UCLA, they have been fairly efficient, and this was true against the Ducks. They were able to move the ball down the field pretty well as against Cal. And they were decent, you know, in their comeback against Colorado, a team that they really outplayed for the most part, and, you know, had, you know, a lot of turnovers that they handed onto the Buffs' hands. You know, their negative drives number isn't great. They do get a lot of 3 and outs. They're not terribly explosive to this point. Better running the ball than they are throwing the ball. It could be, I mean, this could be true too with DTR out again. The Arizona defense looked more, I mean, somewhat improved. They definitely gave up more yards than they gave up points against USC. But, you know, we'll see sort of where they shake out. They've been a lot better against the pass than they've been against the run, you know, thus far. Their run numbers, they have really struggled, even against USC, but also against Washington. The middle of this defense has really been a problem. The linebackers and safeties have struggled in coverage. You know, UCLA is a tight end oriented passing game with Chip Kelly. Oddly, I mean, if you haven't been paying attention to what Chip Kelly's offense looked like since he came back from the NFL, and you're totally excused if you haven't, you know, his passing game tends to run through the tight end, a lot of bend routes. They will look to get, you know, the tight end, Greg Dulcich involved here. You know, this could depend on how well Arizona's defensive line, which is improved with some graduate transfers in there, continues to play, and if they can keep the linebackers, which are young, and the safeties, which are young, clean in the run game. On the other side of the ball, Arizona comes in at 68, UCLA's at 71. Arizona's number is a little depressed because they had to play Washington last week, which actually we had projected to be a top 4 defense, and is literally actually playing like it, unlike Oregon. Washington's defense looks salty. They absolutely shut down this Arizona offense last week when they had the ones in. You know, Arizona struggled to move the ball. You know, the wide receivers, you know, had trouble getting open. The offensive line had trouble blocking. Just a real tough outing. After what they played pretty well against USC. USC had a decent game plan to take away their top 2 wide receivers. Arizona was able to get once they it took them a little longer than you'd like to realize that, but once they did realize that, they were able to funnel the offense through the 3-4 wide receivers, and it worked. Their play efficiency and negative drives are really where they shine. Not a lot of 3 and outs. They are able to move the ball. They're a little more explosive. They need to work on this drive efficiency number. They need to be able to put together long drives to be able to put up points. They're definitely better with Grant Gunnell and throwing the ball than they are running the ball up to this point. UCLA's defense, they had a big run pass split last year. They've really struggled. I mean, Jerry Asanaro, it was amazing that he kept his job coming into this year as defensive coordinator, considering their troubles. They've done pretty well, though, at containing explosive drives. Some of this, though, comes from that really big game that they had against Cal, where they just absolutely shut down a Cal offense that looked like it was waking up from a coma. Their play efficiency number is pretty good, awful at causing 3 and outs. I'm interested. I mean, I want a lot more data again, still on this UCLA defense. I don't think we have a really good handle on them yet and what they're going to look like. They are stout up the middle. Odigizua is a terrific NFL caliber talent that they have playing nose. He's someone to keep an eye on. If he has a big game, it could spell trouble for Arizona. If Arizona's smart, they will run outside and not try to, slam the ball in the AB gap, with the inside zone. If they do that, they have a shot, in this game. UCLA's got a 78% win probability. Again, like, they better not finish in the negative on turnovers, because Arizona could absolutely hang in this game and be able to put up some points. This one's a tough one. So we've got Jimmy Lake as your new head coach at Washington. Kyle Whittingham is your longstanding head coach at the Utes. I say this is a tough one because Utah's only played one game thus far, and Washington's only played 2, and so this is mostly preseason data in for both of these teams. But in particular for the Utes, they looked really bad. I mean, let's be frank, they looked bad against USC. And some of that is, some issues that they had with COVID and players that weren't playing. But, this offense, under John Donovan for the Huskies, they haven't had to show us much, thus far. They were able to run the ball really effectively against Oregon State, so they did that. They were able to throw the ball really effectively against the middle of that Arizona defense, which, had some walk-ons playing, so they did that. And it just... they haven't been challenged. I mean, what I'm interested to see is I want to see this Washington offense challenged a little bit more, because they just haven't had to do or show anything when they actually have to play anyone good. And that's going to tell us what their real ceiling might be. This, however, this Utah defense right now, and you can tell they're better running the ball from that Oregon State and Arizona game than they are throwing the ball. This Utah defense was 130 in returning production in Bill Connolly's numbers. Coming into this year, we had them projected at 41 ish, so this is still mostly preseason weight. They struggled, to stop USC last week. Negative drives is probably one of their best numbers that they've got out there, forcing 3 and outs, but not a big run pass split. But this Utah unit, they struggled at times to get pressure on Slovis last week out of their front 4. Guys that are really still learning after taking over for a lot of talent that went off to the NFL, and their secondary was lights out last season. They relied on that to in some ways to generate enough coverage for the pass rush to continue to get home. They're going to have to, and they're a green dog team. So if the running back doesn't go out on a route, Utah is going to send that linebacker as a late blitzer. That's got to get home in this game. They have to find a way to slow down this, but this might be, because Washington's got Stanford after this and then Oregon. This might be the best defense they face all season, considering how bad Oregon looks right now. We may not see Washington actually play a decent defense at all this year, depending on who they might shake out with in a bowl matchup. This could be a year for the year of John Donovan, if you will, where he gets to look good against a bunch of very bad defenses. The other side of the ball, this could get really ugly. Washington's defense, as I said, looks really, really good. I would ignore that drive efficiency number. I would say, some of that is from Oregon State, who was able to put together some very efficient long drives against this Husky defense, running the ball right up the middle. Oregon State has a pretty good offensive line with a great offensive line coach in Jim Halchuk. But the other numbers for the Huskies are just fantastic. Tops in enforcing, negative, 3 and outs, turnovers. Great at controlling the yards per play. This defense is designed from the get-go to stop big plays. Pete Kwiatkowski is your DC again, one of the best in the business. On the other side of the ball, this Utah offense was projected to be a bit better. Cameron Rising was your starter at QB, the transfer from Texas. He was injured. But not that he was playing great, but he was injured. Early in that game against USC. In comes Jake Bentley. Jake Bentley looked a lot like the bad Jake Bentley that we saw at South Carolina. It was an ugly look. Utah did have some COVID issues with their offensive line. They returned, I believe, all 5 starters on their offensive line. The problem is their offensive line stunk last year. And they were, a lot of their sins in the running game were covered up by Zach Moss with yards after contact, because they were not a good blocking team at all. I don't expect that to improve in this game. In fact, I think this for Washington could be a really, really hard game against this, this Washington secondary that's able to take things away. They were able, if Washington's able to contain the run reasonably well and force Bentley to throw the ball, this game could be really, really ugly for the Utes in a lot of ways. So it is projected to be reasonably close. Washington's got a 77% win probability coming into this one. I think the Huskies are likely going to win by more than that in this game. They're probably going to have some pretty good field position. Bentley's likely going to feel some pressure. That Arizona offensive line really struggled with Washington's pass rush, even with Onwuzurike and Tryon out. I think that's going to be the case again. I think that, Washington's able to really shut down and look for, watch out for turnovers with Bentley, throwing with pass coverage into his face, into, some zone coverage where he may not see, somebody sitting on the underneath. It was not a good performance last week. All right, to the ACC. So in comes, this game should be pretty fun. These teams are close enough that home field advantage makes this the smaller home field advantage makes this a reasonably close, interesting game. So 34 Louisville, Scott Satterfield, 60 Boston College, Jeff Hafley in his first season, Satterfield in the second. This offense, Dwayne Ledford is your OC for the Cardinals, and Boston College, you've got Tem Lukabu as your defensive coordinator. The offense here for Louisville was the engine last year. They've continued to be the engine this year. This App State, rushing offense has translated pretty well into the Power Five so far. There you can look down there and see their effective rush number at 23. They're a little better running the ball than they are throwing the ball. But they're an explosive running team. I mean, that's where they put up more of their points. They struggle at putting together long drives, number 72 in drive efficiency. Something to keep an eye on here. This defense for Boston College has been decent. I mean, they're not great, but they've been decent. And, where they do, make most of their, name, if you will, is at negative drives, forcing 3 and outs. They do contain the yards per play pretty well, but they struggle with giving up some longer drives and big plays, something for them to work on. A little better against the pass than they are against the run. Doesn't necessarily bode well for this game. On the other side of the ball, we've got Frank Signetti as your Boston College OC, taking on Brian Brown, the defensive coordinator at Louisville. Louisville's defense has taken a big step forward, and there's no getting around that. I mean, they were horrendous the year before. They were horrendous the year before that. Brown has really managed to make some progress in year 2 of his term. And they're where they really excel is drive efficiency, containing long drives, making teams, have to work to drive the length of the field, but they do give up some big plays. And so their negative drives number, just not enough 3 and outs. They're a lot better against the pass than they are against the run. That actually plays pretty well into what this Boston College offense likes to do. This offense for Boston College at number 46, they're decent. This is a surprising offense to watch, considering, the transfer that they had of their, some of the transfers that they had out. Their drive efficiency number is not great. But most of these numbers are sort of all hanging around in the same level, right? Like, I mean, none of these numbers are great. They're not horrendous. I mean, they could be a lot worse, particularly with the fact that, the dispersion that we have, in the models right now. But, they definitely like to throw the ball more than they like to run it. If they can get any kind of running game going against this Louisville offense, that would be to their advantage. They would be smart to do that, because they might need to key off of that, to be able to set up the pass against what is a little bit better of a pass offense. So this game is pretty tight. Louisville with a 63% win probability here. Again, like, Louisville wants to make sure that they don't finish with any turnovers, because if they do, Boston College could definitely come in and steal this game at home. Hey, we're covering Sunny Dike. There's just, it's almost inevitable whenever there's a game on for the group of 5 where I'm like, yes, that'll be the game this week. It gets canceled. It is like trying to find, like the headline group of 5 game where you're like, oh man, this is going to be the game this week. It's just, it's a pain. So, this Sonny Dykes team, 52 at SMU against East Carolina. Mike Houston's your head coach at East Carolina. They're at number 89. If you look here, Garrett Riley's brother of Lincoln Riley should be able to put up some points for this offense. They're very good throwing the ball, number 16 in effective pass. Their run numbers have begun to creep up a little bit. Riley, has that App State experience as a running backs coach there. And Dykes has tried to bring, it's been really interesting his hires. He's brought in guys that have more of a running background to be the OC, and then incorporated them into a system which still, has a lot of throwing into it. They're a lot more explosive than they are, efficient right now. Their drive efficiency numbers, I mean, they mostly rely on big plays. They don't do a lot of 3 and outs. Like, this is a solid, fun to watch. This is, there are a lot of teams in college football that would like to have an offense this good, to be frank. They get the East Carolina defense under Blake Harrell. They're struggling. I mean, they're at number 90 overall. They're decent at drive efficiency, but where they struggle is in giving up big plays. That might not bode particularly well for this game. They don't have a big run pass split though, so I mean they're it's not as if their pass defense is going to be out there floundering and they're coming in with some great run defense. I mean, neither is particularly good in this game. I mean, you should really fully expect them to be able to the Mustangs to be able to move the ball and put up points here. On the other side of the ball, it's Donnie Kilpatrick is your OC for ECU. Kevin Kane's your DC for SMU. The Ponies have really struggled, however, on this side of the ball. They do give up long drives, 114 in drive efficiency. Their explosive drives numbers a lot better, significantly better at 24. And their negative drives numbers not bad, at forcing 3 and outs. Pretty even run pass split. Where they struggle more, I mean, where East Carolina has struggled. They've struggled to put together long drives. They've struggled to be particularly explosive. They've got a decent play efficiency number. I mean, their yards per play number is not bad. They struggle to maintain it and be able to put together first downs. Too many negative drives. Too many 3 and outs. They're a lot. They're a little bit better running the ball than they are at throwing the ball. They should still, I mean, in this era of big offense, they should still be able to move the ball pretty effectively, here. SMU's has got a 78% win probability. They are on the road. East Carolina probably needs to finish closer to +2 on turnovers. It would be on my expectation of this game in order to win or keep it really close. SMU should have a significant advantage here. So it was a tougher week than I would like with game cancellations coming in for the group of 5 games this week, unfortunately. So we're back. I'm interested. Like we are starting to see, I wouldn't say we're necessarily, we've started to see some instances where, game times have started to be affected by, restrictions that governments have put in place. The games in California have to be done by 10 to, beat out the curfew that is in place there. I don't know. I mean, we'll see where things go after we end up with what the post-Thanksgiving bounce in cases looks like. And there will, there's going to be, because people will have had, invited people outside their bubble into Thanksgiving. If we end up with any more restrictions in place, it is, cases are climbing to the point where hospitals are Vanderbilt just shut down the children's wing. I mean, I wouldn't say shut down. They moved and restricted the size of the children's wing at their hospital to be able to create more space for patients. It's not even necessarily Nashville that's being overwhelmed. It's Nashville is being overwhelmed because rural Tennessee and the surrounding areas is being overwhelmed. Ohio State is having some of the same trouble here in Columbus. Wyoming, where I grew up, they are no longer able to move patients out into Billings or Denver as effectively as they have in the past because there's simply no space in those places. So we will see the effect that this will have in college football as we go down the stretch. We are at the point where it's possible that Ohio State could, if they have another game canceled, not under the rules that the Big Ten set out at the beginning, not qualify for the Big Ten championship game. But this has already happened to Wisconsin, who had a cancellation this week. They would have struggled to make up for their five turnover performance, where they gifted that game to Northwestern. Northwestern had a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch. Losing 2 games was unlikely, but they, the Badgers, are really out of it numerically already, because they wouldn't even qualify given the number of games that they have played. So what this looks like down the stretch, where the teams that have there are teams that have gotten significant game time in prior to this this week, are going to be in a different spot, a very different spot resume wise than Pac-12 and Big Ten teams might be, who are really coming in and trying to play in the teeth of the pandemic. The resume questions start to really resonate as we head towards playoff selection, because traditionally the playoff committee doesn't select the best team. I mean, usually the best teams end up having close to the best resume. And so the question of who deserves it most and who's the best there's often significant overlap between those sets. But traditionally the committee and everyone in the world tends to lean towards questions of deserve and fairness more than questions of best. So, I mean, even though in theory, the mandate of the playoff committee is to select the best teams, they almost always end up picking the most deserving teams. That this year, that could be put into a severe test. I'm somewhat interested in a macabre way to see what this looks like as the playoff committee has to pick teams for this, because their traditional, as someone put out yesterday, if Ohio State ends up missing another game, cancellation, and they're unable to play in the Big Ten championship, and let's say Northwestern wins that undefeated, do you pick the Wildcats ahead of the Buckeyes? I mean, you could. You should not, if you actually want to see the best teams in there. But it will be very difficult for the committee to ignore, Northwestern's resume, if you will. And that's what that's what they end up doing most of the selection on. And a lot of the metrics that the committee gets are not really appropriate for determining best team. So, I'm like the resume portion of this, like, will likely end up winning out. You will see that more and more, but absolutely keep an eye on, who qualifies for it. I mean, Clemson is in a spot where they, after Dabo's disastrous handling of having a symptomatic player that he let practice all week, frankly, I mean, Dabo's just an idiot for this, and then complaining about it is a jerk on top of it. But the unbelievable, why he is so mad, really. He's put his own team in a position where if they were to drop another game due to COVID, they might not qualify, for the ACC championship against Notre Dame again. Miami might have that spot sewn up ahead of them, even though they beat Miami head to head. As it is right now, Clemson still has the inside track, and it's not an issue. But they cannot afford to have another cancellation. I mean, the razor, there's a razor thin margin that they have to walk to get through the end of the season, unscathed. And in the back of their head, they have to almost be hoping that Miami can gets a cancellation, and so that the Hurricanes, even it up back with them, too. So it's going to be, interesting to see. To put it mildly, as teams, really struggle to get through the end of this season. I asked back in July whether we wanted to put what this was even going to look like, how we were going to be able to handle this and get through this. I got to say, the first part of the season, I didn't look so good in predicting what it would actually be like in trying to play football in the pandemic. We mostly got games in with a handful of cancellations each week. As we chug towards the end here, it is looking a little more like, what is this season even going to look like? What is this playoff really going to look like? I mean, I'm really interested to see what college football is able to cobble together to not have this season just have an enormous asterisk by it. But that said, I mean, if you are a fan of fun college football, I mean, I definitely would like to see this Alabama team, which looks like they are rolling and putting it together. And get well. I mean, a couple coaches came down this week again. Nick Saban, and Ryan Day both testing positive this week. And with Saban this time, it not being a false positive. So get well, absolutely. But I mean, Alabama's rolling. Ohio State looks pretty good. A little more suspect on defense that I would like. Clemson looks good. Notre Dame looks good. The Irish look more complete than we've seen them maybe in years. And offensively, the questions that we had coming to the season appear to be answered, and they've been pretty solid on the defensive side. So there's plenty to look forward to, about this college football season still. But we need teams to. I mean, it's nearly impossible. We're not playing in a bubble, but we need teams to hold it together. And limp through to the end of this season without utter chaos reigning, which would have, I mean, if Clemson were to get the bump from, the ACC championship, that they're likely done. I mean, their shot to get in, it really relies on, being able to beat Notre Dame in the ACC championship game. It's unlikely that they get in, if they get bumped out. The same goes, I mean, Ohio State, we've talked about that, they're going to, the committee is going to struggle to put in the Buckeyes over a team that played more games than what, played in the Big Ten championship game, if they were to get knocked out. So and as we've seen with Wisconsin, I mean, with the backup quarterback, with some COVID rustiness in the game against Northwestern, come in and, really struggle, 5 turnovers. There are some teams out there. I mean, that kind of thing happens every year where some contender for the playoff just lays a duck one game. Ohio State, I joked around about Ohio State having that kind of performance, under Urban Meyer, they had that kind of performance in a couple of seasons where they would go out and either against Purdue or Iowa, they had like a 5 turnover game and really just blew it. That's not that unusual. But on all of the additional sort of chaos swirling around it, there's really only one SEC team right now. I mean, maybe you could talk about A&M. A&M look pretty good, but there's definitely a gap between them and Alabama. And that's also true really of Florida as well. To really say, like putting in a second SEC team, hard to see. We'll see where Washington shakes out. They might. I mean, that defense looks very, very good. They might, if the offense is in any way decent, we'll see. Have something of an argument. I don't know. I think it's going to be hard for any Pac-12 team to have an argument this year to deserve to be in the playoff. So that's what we got this week. Let's wrap it with that. So, you can find all the stats you just saw and a lot more at sharpcollegefootball.com. I generally get them updated by 9 a.m. every Sunday morning. And I will again tomorrow, so that you will have updated numbers for the next week. I'm Rob Bowrron, the econometrician behind Beta Rank. I also tweet out from at Sharp College Football. We have a Pac-12 podcast at 12 Pack Radio. You can find all the back episodes of that at sharpcollegefootball.com/12 Pack Radio. Tune in this week. We've been doing, we have some guys on that do tape analysis. And they're doing a podcast every 2 weeks, breaking down scheme and X's and O's from around the Pac-12. It's worth a listen. Scheme and X's and O's apply across more than just the Pac-12, of course, but I think they did a great job. So tune in for that. Anyway, thank you so much for tuning in. Stay safe out there. Do your part for public health. Take care of your neighbors. It's important. Again, and enjoy another Saturday of college football out there.